What if I told you that the so-called missing years of Jesus weren't missing at all, but spent in Egypt and India, studying ancient wisdom that prepared him for his mission? Is the part of the story you won't hear in Sunday school. Edgar Cayce once said, "In Egypt, Jesus was prepared. And in India, he learned the laws that balance the body and soul." Now, whether you believe Cayce was a prophet, a mystic, or just an ordinary man with extraordinary visions, one thing's for sure, his stories about Jesus' hidden years are some of the most mind-blowing revelations you'll ever hear. Think about it, we all know the childhood stories of Jesus in Bethlehem. And of course, the miracles and teachings during his last 3 years. But here's the mystery. The Bible is completely silent on nearly 2 decades of his life, from the age of 12 until about 30. Nothing. Where was he? What was he doing? Cayce's answer is as wild as it is fascinating. He claimed that Jesus traveled far beyond Nazareth and to the great temples of Egypt, the deserts of India, maybe even the mountains of Tibet to study with sages, priests, and masters of wisdom. And tonight, we're going to pull on that thread. We'll look at the legends, the archaeology, the ancient manuscripts, and yes, Cayce's own trance readings to see if this unbelievable story could actually be true. So buckle up, because this journey takes us way beyond Galilee, into a hidden chapter of history that might just change the way you see Jesus forever. The Bible gives us glimpses of Jesus' early life, but only glimpses. We see his birth in Bethlehem, the shepherds and wise men, the flight into Egypt to escape King Herod, and a curious moment when a 12-year-old Jesus amazed the rabbis at the temple in Jerusalem with his wisdom. From the age of 12 until about 30, when he suddenly reappears at the Jordan River to be baptized by John, there are no official records in the Bible, no stories, no details, nothing. It's as if nearly 2 decades of his life just vanish from the script. Now, pause for a second and think about this. We're talking about the most influential figure in human history, and yet the majority of his formative years, the years that shaped his worldview, his teachings, and his spiritual mastery, are completely missing from the official story. That's like reading a biography of Albert Einstein that skips straight from middle school to the day he published his theory of relativity. Wouldn't you wonder what happened in between? And people have wondered. For centuries, theologians, historians, and ordinary seekers have asked, did he simply stay in Nazareth, working quietly as a carpenter? Or did he travel? Did he learn? Did he seek wisdom far beyond the borders of Judea? This is where Edgar Cayce comes in, known as the Sleeping Prophet. Cayce gave over 14,000 trance readings in the early 20th century. Many of them touched on health, healing, and spiritual growth. But some just a few spoke of Jesus. And in those rare readings, Cayce claimed that Jesus didn't spend those years hidden away in Nazareth. Instead, he embarked on a journey across ancient lands, absorbing wisdom from Egypt, India, and even Tibet. Imagine that for a moment. The young Jesus, not just studying scripture in a small Galilean village, but traveling ancient trade routes, walking through the towering temples of Egypt, meditating with sages in India, and perhaps even debating monks in the Himalayan mountains. If true, this would completely reframe how we see the origins of his teachings. Suddenly, the parables about compassion, forgiveness, and the unity of all life wouldn't just spring out of nowhere. They would echo the universal truths taught across civilizations, from the Vedas of India to the mysteries of Egypt, and you can probably feel it. This is where the story gets electrifying, because while the Bible is silent, legends are not in. Villages from Kashmir to the Nile, stories whisper of a holy man from the West who came seeking wisdom. In the dusty corners of monasteries, manuscripts speak of a teacher named Issa. And in Cayce's visions, the pieces of this lost puzzle fall dramatically into place. So the question we're left with is simple. but explosive. Was Jesus really gone from the record because he was hidden, or because he was somewhere else entirely? And to answer that, we need to follow Cayce's trail to the first great destination on Jesus' hidden journey: Egypt, a land of pyramids, temples, and mysteries older than history itself. When we think of ancient Egypt, we picture pyramids rising out of the desert, hieroglyphs etched into stone, and temples aligned with the stars. But what if I told you this wasn't just the land of pharaohs? It was also, according to Edgar Cayce, the first training ground for Jesus. Cayce described Egypt as a kind of spiritual university. He said that long before Jesus' birth, schools of wisdom had been established here, preserving sacred knowledge about the body, the soul, and the cosmos itself. These weren't ordinary classrooms. Imagine vast temples like Heliopolis or Luxor, places where priests studied medicine, astronomy, and mystical initiation rites. Now, according to Cayce's readings, young Jesus was taken to Egypt after the famous flight into Egypt, when his family escaped King Herod. But here's the twist. Cayce claimed that Jesus later returned, not as a refugee child, but as a student trained in the secret wisdom of the priests. Picture it: Jesus walking through the colossal columns of the Temple of Isis at Philae, or perhaps studying alongside priests in Heliopolis, where astronomy and sacred geometry were taught. Cayce even suggested that Jesus underwent initiation rituals in the Great Pyramid itself, rituals meant to prepare a soul for its divine mission. Sounds almost unbelievable, right? But here's the kicker. Egypt has always been associated with mystery schools, initiation rites, and hidden knowledge. Even Greek philosophers like Pythagoras and Plato were said to have studied there. So why not Jesus? And here's where the story gets even juicier. Egyptian legends themselves speak of foreign seekers who came to learn from their temples. Some archaeologists point out that Alexandria, the intellectual capital of the ancient world, was a melting pot of ideas, where Jewish, Egyptian, and Greek wisdom mixed freely. If Jesus wanted to expand his spiritual knowledge, Egypt was the place to do it. Now, imagine the audience's reaction here. Wait a second. Jesus in the Great Pyramid, studying mysticism before his ministry. It's the kind of idea that makes you lean in closer. And we're not just pulling from Cayce here. Historians note that Egyptian healing techniques, like the use of oils, herbs, and even sound vibrations, it was strange resemblance to the way Jesus healed the sick. Could it be that some of what he learned in Egypt stayed with him and later surfaced as miracles? Let's pause with a rhetorical question. If the Son of God was meant to carry a universal message for all humanity, wouldn't it make sense that his path took him through the great wisdom traditions of the world? And according to Cayce, Egypt was just the beginning. Because after absorbing the mysteries of the Nile, Jesus would continue his quest for enlightenment further east, to the land of sages, mantras, and meditation, India. If Egypt was a place of hidden temples and initiations, India was a land overflowing with spiritual traditions, some stretching back thousands of years. According to Edgar Cayce, after his time in Egypt, Jesus, still a young man, continued eastward along the ancient trade routes that linked the Middle East with the Indian subcontinent. And here's where things get fascinating. In the 19th century, a Russian traveler named Nicholas Notovich claimed to have discovered ancient manuscripts in a Tibetan monastery in Ladakh, near the Indian border. These manuscripts told the story of a saintly figure named Issa, holy man from the West, who traveled to India, studied the Vedas, and later taught compassion, humility, and the equality of all before God. Issa. Think about that name. To many scholars, it sounds strikingly similar to Issa, the Arabic name for Jesus, found in the Quran. Coincidence or a hidden clue? According to these manuscripts, Issa studied with Brahmins, learned the Sanskrit scriptures, and even challenged the religious elite for exploiting the poor. Does that sound familiar? Standing up to the powerful, speaking for the oppressed. It's exactly the kind of teaching we see in the Gospels decades later. Now, Cayce never directly quoted these manuscripts, but in his trance readings, he described Jesus traveling to India and Tibet to absorb spiritual truths. He said Jesus studied meditation, yoga, and the philosophy of reincarnation, not to adopt them wholesale, but to understand the great currents of spiritual wisdom flowing through humanity. Here's where I'd pause and let the audience's curiosity rise. What if Jesus' parables about the kingdom of God, his emphasis on inner transformation, even his idea of being born again, were enriched by his time in India? Of course, mainstream historians are divided on Notovitch's discovery. Some dismiss the life of Saint Issa as a fabrication, but others point out that oral traditions in northern India and Kashmir still speak of a holy man from the West who walked among them. And here's something intriguing. The region of Kashmir has a shrine known as the Rosable Tomb, where locals have long believed lies the body of a saint named Issa. Some even claimed this was Jesus himself, who survived the crucifixion and traveled back to the east. Whether you buy that or not, it adds another layer of mystery to the story. So, let's step back. From Cayce's perspective, Jesus wasn't just waiting in Nazareth during those missing years. He was actively seeking wisdom, walking thousands of miles and absorbing the spiritual traditions of multiple civilizations. Egypt gave him sacred science. India offered him meditation and compassion. And Tibet, well, that's the next stop, because Cayce suggested that Jesus also visited the high monasteries of the Himalayas, where he encountered Buddhist teachings of selflessness and enlightenment. And here's the kicker. Doesn't it suddenly make sense why, when Jesus finally begins his ministry, he speaks with such authority, blending wisdom, parable, and compassion in ways no one had ever heard before? It wasn't just divine inspiration, may have also been the fruit of a global spiritual journey. So far, we've followed the trail from Egypt's temples to India's ashrams. But Edgar Cayce hinted that the journey didn't stop there. According to his readings, Jesus also made his way into Tibet, a place often called the rooftop of Patna, the world where Buddhist monasteries guarded ancient secrets of consciousness and compassion. Think about it. The Himalayas have always carried an aura of mystery. Even today, travelers speak of remote monasteries where monks practice meditation techniques that seem almost superhumans, lowering their heartbeat, withstanding freezing temperatures, even entering altered states of awareness. Now, imagine a young seeker named Jesus encountering this environment for the first time. According to Cayce, Jesus spent time learning from Buddhist teachers, studying the concept of compassion for all living beings, the practice of detachment from worldly desires, and the deep discipline of meditation. If you've ever noticed how Jesus' Sermon on the Mount echoes themes of humility, love, and inner purity, it's not hard to imagine the resonance with Buddhist teachings. And remember those Ladakh manuscripts discovered by Nicholas Notovitch? They claimed Issa, the mysterious holy man from the West, spent time in monasteries of the Himalayas. Monks allegedly preserved his story in palm leaf manuscripts, passing it down for centuries. Skeptics have debated their authenticity, but the fact that multiple monasteries still whisper about a Western teacher in those times is, at the very least, eyebrow-raising. Here's how I'd frame it for the audience. Imagine Jesus sitting cross-legged beside saffron-robed monks, learning the art of meditation and silent prayer. Imagine him walking mountain trails, absorbing the rhythm of chanting and the ringing of bells echoing through snow-covered valleys. Doesn't that paint a completely different picture of the lost years than the silent pages of the Bible? Now, let's connect the dots. Buddhism taught compassion, the release of suffering, and the idea of transcending the self. Later, in his ministry, Jesus would say things like, "Whoever loses their life will find it, and blessed are the meek." You can almost hear the harmony across traditions. Cayce suggested that Jesus wasn't simply collecting knowledge like a tourist. He was preparing himself piece by piece for a mission that required a balance of east and west, spirit and matter, heaven and earth. And here's a wow moment to leave hanging. Some traditions even say that after the crucifixion, Jesus may have returned to these very regions, bringing his message full circle. Whether or not that's true, striking how many Eastern legends point back to a teacher from the West who looked, acted, and spoke a lot like Jesus. So, by the time he returns to Galilee at around age 30, Jesus isn't just a carpenter's son. He's someone who has walked through temples, meditated in ashrams, and prayed in monasteries. He's absorbed the wisdom of civilizations, and now he's ready to reveal a universal truth, one that transcends cultures and unites humanity. But wait, what happens when he finally reappears in history? Why do the Gospels describe him teaching with such radical authority, as if he carried the knowledge of the ages? That's exactly what we'll uncover next. Because the missing years were only preparation. The real story begins when Jesus returns home and everything changes. After years of traveling through Egypt, India, and Tibet, we follow Cayce's vision. Jesus eventually returned home to Galilee. To his neighbors, he was still the son of a carpenter, a man who had been gone for many years, quietly working, quietly waiting. But beneath that humble appearance was someone utterly transformed. Think about this. The Gospels tell us almost nothing about Jesus. Between the ages of 12 and 30, suddenly he reappears, baptized by John in the Jordan River. Immediately begins teaching with such wisdom and authority that crowds are astonished. Where did this man get these things? The people ask in Mark 6:2. That question right there hints at a mystery. If we view this through Cayce's lens, the answer is simple. He got them from years of study, practice, and immersion in the greatest wisdom traditions of the world. Egypt gave him sacred science and healing techniques. India taught him meditation, compassion, and the rhythm of spiritual discipline. Tibet showed him the power of inner silence and universal compassion. And now, he was ready to synthesize all of it into something entirely new at teaching. That would ignite hearts and transform lives. Here's how I describe it to the audience. Imagine someone who studied in the world's greatest universities, but instead of returning with a stack of diplomas, he returned with a message so simple and powerful that farmers, fishermen, and shepherds could understand it instantly. That's why, when Jesus spoke, people were shocked. He wasn't quoting from scrolls like the scribes. He wasn't following rigid traditions. He spoke as someone who had seen truth, who carried wisdom not from books, but from lived experience. Even his miracles seem to reflect this synthesis. Healing with touch and words recalls Egyptian practices. His parables echo Eastern storytelling styles. His command to love your enemies resonates with the Buddhist idea of compassion for all beings. And let's not forget, Cayce emphasized that Jesus' journey wasn't about copying other traditions, but about weaving them together into something new. He was preparing himself to become the channel through which divine love could fully flow into the world. Here's a rhetorical twist for the viewers. What if the reason Jesus' words still feel alive today, 2,000 years later? Because they weren't limited to one culture or tradition. What if they were born out of a global, timeless search for truth? No wonder people couldn't figure him out. Some said he was a prophet. Others thought he was Elijah reborn. But Cayce would say, he was more than all of that. He was the Christ, but also a traveler, a seeker, a student who walked the same roads we do, searching for light. And this is where the story turns toward its climax. Because if these hidden years truly shaped Jesus, then they hold the key to understanding his ultimate mission and Cayce's most breathtaking claim, that this journey was not just about Jesus, but about what humanity itself is capable of. Here's where it all comes together. We followed Jesus through Cayce's lens across Egypt, India, and Tibet. We've seen him study, meditate, and learn from the greatest traditions of humanity. But Edgar Cayce's ultimate revelation goes even deeper. These hidden years weren't just preparation for a ministry in Judea. They were part of something far bigger. Cosmic mission. Cayce claimed that Jesus wasn't simply a wise teacher or even just the Messiah in a religious sense. He described Jesus as the elder brother, a soul who had been reincarnating through human history, moving closer and closer to perfect union with God. In this reading, those hidden years were the final chapter in a long journey, not just of one man, but of the entire human race. Think about it. If Jesus really walked through temples, monasteries, and sacred sites across multiple cultures, then he wasn't just uniting people in one land, he was weaving together the spiritual DNA of humanity. Almost as if he was saying, truth is not owned by one tradition, it's universal. This is Cayce's wow factor claim. The hidden years of Jesus revealed that his message wasn't born in isolation. It was global, cosmic. The Christ consciousness, as Cayce called it, was something every soul could awaken to. And here's the spine-tingling part. Cayce suggested that Jesus' journey through Egypt, India, and Tibet wasn't just for him, it was for us. He walked that path to blaze a trail humanity could one day follow. His hidden years show us that enlightenment is not a gift for the few, but the destiny of the many. Imagine saying this to the audience. The man we think of as a simple carpenter actually carried within him the wisdom of empires, the silence of the Himalayas, and the healing knowledge of ancient priests. And when he returned to Galilee, he didn't say, "Look at me." He said, "Follow me." That's the wow moment. The hidden years weren't hidden at all. They were written in the stones of temples, the chants of monks, and the stories of travelers who preserved the memory of Issa. Cayce was simply peeling back the veil. So, when Jesus finally appears at age 30, teaching with unmatched authority, it isn't a mystery anymore. It's the culmination of a cosmic preparation that stretched across nations, traditions, and even lifetimes. And here's where I'd pause, letting the weight of that sink in. What if the story of Jesus is not just the story of one man, but the story of all of U.S. souls on a long journey back to the source? So, let's step back for a moment. We began with the mystery of Jesus. Hidden years, the long gap between boyhood and the moment he began his ministry. The Bible is silent, but Cayce's readings opened a window. Jesus traveling to Egypt, learning the ancient healing arts, journeying to India, discovering meditation and the laws of karma, climbing into Tibet, absorbing the deep compassion of Buddhist practice. By the time he returned to Galilee, he wasn't just a carpenter's son. He was someone who had carried the wisdom of nations within him. Someone who could unite East and West, spirit and matter, heaven and earth, and the most surprising point. According to Cayce, this wasn't just about Jesus' preparation. It was about showing humanity that the journey of the soul is vast, that truth is universal, and that enlightenment isn't locked away in one book or one temple. It belongs to all of us, which leads to the question I want to leave with you. If Jesus' hidden years were spent learning from multiple cultures and traditions, what does that say about the true nature of wisdom and spiritual growth? Do you think his teachings were shaped by a global journey? Were they purely divine revelation? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Asterisk, if this story stirred something in you, don't stop here. Okay, hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and share it with someone who loves exploring the mysteries of history and spirit. And if you're hungry for more, you might want to check out our next video, Edgar Cayce's shocking revelation. Did Jesus reincarnate many times before Earth? Because trust me, this rabbit hole goes much deeper.